and turn it over to Vice Mayor Garland. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is going to be our first public discussion for our nuisance ordinance subcommittee. I just want to say that this subcommittee came out of a Human Services and Community Safety Committee that I used to co-chair with Councilmember Joel Navarro. So we have moved this on and moved different way of how we are presenting ordinances, and now this is our subcommittee. What was important about doing this that we saw was that really it affects the quality of life and in our neighborhoods and community safety. So we thought this was a good one for us to be addressing. I will say that this subcommittee was formed in September 2024 and addresses the issues related to neighborhood safety and quality of life. The committee members that work with me are the Mayor Corey Woods and Council Member Arlene Chin. So I will go ahead and turn it over to our City Attorney Eric Anderson to start walking us through the suggestions for this ordinance.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I think everybody can hear me okay. If not, let me know. Yeah, Parish. So yes, the nuisance, we actually have, we've referred it to as a nuisance ordinance. We're actually amending or proposing to amend 3 different parts of the Tempe City Code. One is the nuisance party ordinance, which is found in a different section. And then the new aspect will be the new provisions regarding excessive calls for service, which we'll discuss in a minute. And then finally, Appendix A, which is the fees portion, is also being proposed to be amended in at the end of the code to change the amount of the fines for the violations of the nuisance party ordinance that's being so. There's some additional language too, just in both that will seek to strengthen the ability to hold both a tenant as well as property owners responsible for violations under the ordinances, and then also clarify some existing ambiguities in the code to make sure that all citizens can understand and conform their behavior. So Parish, if you'll next slide, please. So the nuisance ordinance, what the community should is see, one is the community that's behaving responsibly shouldn't see anything other than the increased ability of the police department and the fire department to hold some of the habitual offenders more accountable through changes, as well as safety plans when circumstances are appropriate, streamline enforcement, and improve practice management, property practice management. So next slide, if you will, please. Parish. So this slide here is a kind of a summary of what's in there. I believe, Parish, you posted the proposed amendments in the ordinance, so the full language is available in the posting. This is just kind of a summary of what each will do and how it will impact potentially the community as it relates to these kind of nuisance issues. For chronic nuisance properties, these are ones that we're defining as ones that have repeated calls for service, generally police calls for service, that are verified to have violations associated with them. There's an enumerated list of violations in the code that will give rise to a dub as an excessive call. And then when excessive calls reach a certain threshold, that will kick in the ordinance and the ability to impose fines for excessive calls. So that's the community impact properties is what they'll be defined as. And then there'll be a different definition for high risk community impact properties that, and those will be ones that have severe egregious type violations, like a large police presence due to drug use or other serious crimes like that causes serious disruption to the neighborhood. The ordinances will, as proposed, give some discretion to the PD to implement depending on what they're seeing on the ground as a day-to-day basis, and then but also give them ability to look at study the calls and see and identify where some of these chronic nuisances are arising. And there'll also be a timeline for or a time period that the calls for service will be have to be within that for certain designations. And then the final is to continue. Sorry, Parrish, if you'll go back. I'm sorry. 3. The second issue is on the existing nuisance parties. There's some additional language for repeat offenders. The Appendix A, those fines will be increased, particularly for chronic offenders where there's up to 3 or more occurrences of a nuisance party at the same location within a 1-year period, excuse me. Also, the owners will be able to be held responsible. So owners simply can't just blame it on a bad tenant. The idea with the ordinance will be to make have the owners encouraged to self-police their own tenants without relying on the police department to do it for them. Another change with that will be that the repeat offenses on the chronic nuisance party violators will have an appeal to the city court. We've added that in there as a means of additional, so the court is a better facility to handle some of those more egregious violations and make sure that from the side of the citizen side, that the offenders or accused offenders have a due process opportunity to appeal if they disagree with the designation. Then the other aspect is enhanced enforcement of quality of life crimes, and those will all be incorporated into the ordinance. So Parrish, if you go next slide, please. Another thing that we resulted as from the committee is an additional provision that actually addresses medical calls and excessive avoidable medical calls. This particular aspect of the ordinance won't be targeted to ordinary citizens, so there won't be any impact. This is really targeted towards care facilities, other licensees that are charging a fee and licensed by the state, or supposed to be licensed by the state, charging a fee to provide healthcare services. But then when the fire department is called and we learn that they don't have the proper staff on subject, and the only reason the fire department is being called is because that care facility didn't have the proper staff, that will give the fire chief the ability to charge the cost of that call to the property or the care operator rather than have the city absorb those costs. And then finally, last bullet point is the chief of police will have, and I discussed this a little bit earlier, the ability to dub those properties as high risk. There's existing provisions for security plans for commercial businesses that the chief of police will be able to, if there's excessive calls, the chief of police will be able to designate them and require them to have a security plan under the code, even if they weren't otherwise required. And then there's a separate provision for residential properties that wouldn't normally be addressed by a security plan. That will allow the chief of police to require the residential property to have a security agreement, which will vary depending on the nature of the offense, the nature of the property, but the police will be working on that. So, and Commander Hale, if you don't mind, I'll just ask you to jump in here real quick. Just give us a brief summary of what, from the police perspective, what these excessive calls do in terms of impact to community resources and the communities. So, and you're on mute, Commander.
Can you hear me? Thank you. And thanks for the opportunity you have to be here and help explain some of this. But one of the things that the ordinance is trying to prevent is people that are habitually, I guess, habitual offenders that are trying to either maximize profits or not taking responsibility for their properties and doing it at the expense of public safety. And so when we are continually going out to a particular business or a particular residence, and it's for, you know, loud parties, or it's for, you know, any numerous serving search warrants because it's a drug house and, you know, we're out there several times, those are starting to burn up a lot of police resources. And those resources are, you know, very valuable, not only to the police department, but to the community at large. And they're meant to go out there and proactively police the community to deter crime and have a reasonable response when somebody calls and asks for police service. And if all of our units are tied up at a particular location on a regular basis, that's going to slow down responses throughout the rest of the city. It's going to reduce the amount of proactive policing that can go in deterring crime throughout the city. And so those all have cumulative impacts on the city, on our tax dollars, on you know, police resources. So those are the kinds of things that we're trying to, I guess, deter and try to partner with community members to say, you're having a problem at your location. Let us help you fix that problem so we don't have to continue to come out and spend valuable resources in policing it after the fact. There's things that people can do to take ownership of their residents, of their businesses, and so that they can then properly manage it without trying to manage it by crisis using the police department.
Thank you, Commander Hale. That's perfect. So Parrish, if you'll do the next slide, please. I've already kind of covered these. I'll just put it up there for the viewers to see. Again, as Commander Hale's talked about it, one of the big goals is to make sure that the property owners kind of become a part of the solution rather than a part of the problem or just a non-participant altogether. And then I pointed out previously that we have added some additional rights of appeal. That's a safeguard measure that we've added to make sure that, you know, citizens who don't agree with the designations and the determinations by the city will have a legal opportunity to challenge that in the courts. So, Vice Mayor, that's a summary of what this is, a conclusion slide. I'll turn it back over to you, Vice Mayor, if you want at this point in time to just in conclusion, that's what we're doing. We're trying to balance public safety, property rights, and as well as the community welfare. Give the police department and other city departments a stronger ability to enforce while gaining proactive compliance. And ultimately, the goal will be to reduce avoidable emergency calls, not the unavoidable ones, but the avoidable ones that can improve the response and efficiency and enhance the quality general of life. So that's kind of the summary. Vice Mayor, I'll turn it back to you. I don't know if you want to monitor questions or.
Yep, I'll go to the next slide. Thank you, Parrish, for bringing it up. Just to let people know that we have another public meeting tonight at 6. We're going to be presenting to the Neighborhood Advisory Commission tomorrow. And then there's a subcommittee meeting where we will discuss any changes or updates. It'll happen on March 20th. It'll go to a council work study session. We're looking at April 3rd. The ordinance at that time requires 2 public hearings, so it'll be April 10th and May 1st, with hopefully then if this all goes through the way we'd like it to, the changes will take effect on June 1st. So just wanted to kind of open up to any questions that we might have. You know, what was great about this committee that we had is it wasn't just a few people that were in there. We had a very large committee that was made up of our code compliance department, our city attorney's office, the police department, the fire medical rescue, and then some residents who attended some of our meetings. So it was a really good, robust discussions regarding these topics. So we will open it up now to any questions we might have. So Shauna, do we have any?
Not yet. You can put your questions in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, the raise hand function is under React. It's a little hard at the bottom of your screen. And then I'll also just remind everyone we're taking comments online. So I did put the link for that in the chat as well.
Thank you.
Okay, so question, will this improve the speed for police to come and shut down the noise complaints within residential areas?
So the speed is going to be determined, you know, based on the amount of units that we have available on any given night when these calls and complaints come in. Eventually, I think when we start getting more compliance in some of these habitual locations, we should start having a faster police response throughout the city on all kinds of calls for service. So that's where we want to get to. But I can't guarantee right away that that's where we're going to be.
Good question. Thank you. Thank you, Commander Hill. Any other questions from the community? Shauna, you don't see any other questions?
Nothing in the chat. If you can't find the raise hand function and want to come off mute, you could do that as well.
I don't see anyone stepping off mute.
Hello.
Oh, there's one.
Hello. My name is Lisa Wakely. I am the Palmcroft Manor chairman of the neighborhood. And we have a new problem house, and it would meet the qualifications of the 3 times a year, because we've called at least half a dozen times now, and they're in a cul-de-sac. And a neighbor of mine said they called again on Friday. I was out of town, and the police came out. They saw a party bus pull up, and we've seen this where there's been 200 to 300 people. They drop them off in Waymos and party buses, so there's no parking issues really. And they were cited at that time. It's a new rental. Somebody just recently moved in. But he was told on Friday by the police officer that he gave them a warning. Well, this house has been a problem, a major problem. We're talking big, huge parties of lots of people. And when he commented that this was a problem, the police officer said he didn't know about any other calls out to there. So do they have a way of checking on a particular address to see what's gone on in the past?
The answer to that is yes. And so what this ordinance does is this provides us a tool so that we can look at history of properties. And then once they fall within the criteria of the ordinance, as far as being a high impact property, they can go out and then be cited or be summoned into court, to face those allegations. So the answer to that question is yes. We run the calls for service, find out what happened at the property, verify that the calls for service was valid, and so the case then can be built. And so it's kind of like doing a criminal investigation, basically looking at the calls for service at some of these particular habitual offenders.
So is there just a gap in communication? Because we get different stories every time somebody's called or comes out. Either we don't know, we can't look that up, or we didn't know there was a problem before. The first time they came out, they got cited, they got a fine. This time they didn't. There's been at least half a dozen or more. I've lost count of how many times we've called on this property. And also, is the owner, which is owned by an LLC, are they being cited or given any sort of notice that this is going on?
Yeah, the officers on scene are not going to have the same search capabilities as our intel analysts who will be helping us to look at these habitual offenders. And so that's where you might have a miscommunication with the officers that are on scene at that particular time, trying to look into that particular incident. But that doesn't mean that they've escaped, so to speak, right? So we can go back and look at calls for service the next day or a week later, and there's 2 other calls for service that fall within the criteria. So those can all start being collected, and then a case start being built on a particular location if it's a habitual offender.
So does the owner of the property also get a notification? Do they know what's going on?
Yes, and so this also provides the opportunity to hold the owners of the location responsible, but that part of that is the notification. So the answer is yes.
Okay.
And Lisa, I'll follow up with you directly and connect
Okay.
you with Commander
Okay.
Hill just so we can get the address and find out more information for you.
And then we used to have, because we had a problem house right next door to us, we give everybody nicknames. There's the creeper. I mean, he used to come knocking on my door in his bathrobe saying, where's Lisa? I love her and stuff. And my husband like, get away. We used to have a neighborhood crime prevention officer. Do we no longer have those?
A neighborhood, what would you call it?
Crime prevention officer?
Yes, we have the Office of Community Policing, and so that actually happens to fall within my area. Sergeant
Okay.
Kathy Click leads that up, and on every these loud parties, they're following up on all these party citations and doing a lot of footwork after every weekend. So
I can't remember the officer who was helping me with this situation, but he actually contacted the owner of the property who lived in Utah. He said, "You're pretty much on the point where you could get a restraining order against this neighbor." And he's moved on, and I have not gotten the current name. Usually our neighborhood association people all kind of get together and share information, and I've not been able to locate the person we have. So we don't have one person anymore that we can contact?
everybody has Sergeant Kathy Click, who is
Oh, okay.
the sergeant over that unit, and then she can then work with the resources that she's been provided, different officers who then are been assigned different tasks to help follow up on these kind of things.
Okay, great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and Lisa, I'll connect you with Sergeant
Okay,
Click, so
great. Thank you.
we'll follow up. And then Commander Hale, just as a follow-up to the previous question in the chat, about the complaints, asking us if it would be non-priority as long as it is not a serious or habitual offender. And then also what counts as a nuisance party and how many people are considered an unlawful gathering.
Yeah. Every call for service is given a priority at the time it's received, not based on the history of the location. So it depends on how the call is received, what information it's given, and then our communication dispatchers then will assign a priority and then put it on the board. So if a shooting's being worked, the shooting will take the highest priority going on in the city, and then we might have 2 or 3 loud parties that are being stacked, waiting for an officer to get freed up to respond to those parties. And that's sometimes where we start getting concerns from the community saying, it's been an hour, this party's still going, nobody's responded. And unfortunately, we have people tied up on these other higher priority calls. It's not that it's assigned a low priority, it's just that it has not reached the level where an officer is freed up yet from other higher priority calls to get to those. So that the priority is given at the time the call is received based on the information. And then regarding the actual definitions of the nuisance party, I'll just read it straight from the ordinance here. And it says a nuisance party means an assembly of persons for a social activity or a special occasion in a manner which constitutes a substantial disturbance of a quiet enjoyment of private or public property. This includes, but are not limited to, excessive noise or traffic, obstruction of public streets by crowds or vehicles, public drunkenness, the service of alcohol to minors, fights, disturbances, and peace, or disturbances of peace and litter. Unlawful gathering is very similar to that, but it basically is with the service of to minors. If the minors are consuming or being served alcohol, or illegal drugs or possession are being consumed. So if those things are occurring, then the nuisance party becomes an unlawful gathering.
Hopefully that
Were there
answers-
any other questions?
Hello?
Yes.
Okay, Lisa again. So
Uh-huh.
I read a lot on Nextdoor. That's where I'm getting my information, and the neighbors ask me questions. There's been a misunderstanding about what time you can call on a party. 2 in the afternoon. On a Saturday, it's allowed until 10 o'clock at night, which is not the code. So clarify for me exactly, if someone can, what that means, when people can call, because Nextdoor is a hotbed of misinformation. People don't and rather than going to the source, they just toss it back and forth amongst themselves. My understanding of the code is anytime there is loud music disturbing the peace, no matter what time of day, what day of the week it is, you can call for service.
That's correct.
Okay.
And the officers will go out there and they will try to be, what's going on, is it reasonable? Let's
Right.
say that they go out to a residence, there's 5 people barbecuing in the backyard, they're playing music, it's 12 in the afternoon on a Sunday, and they're swimming. And it's the music that the neighbor's complaining about because they have a football game they're watching is disturbing them or something. So the officer will then start trying to, it might not meet the standard of, I'm going to cite these people for this party that's disturbing, but they might try to get them to turn the music down and try to reach some kind of settlement or agreement between the neighbors to try to settle that. And
Right.
so it's just based on a reasonableness standard. They take that same gathering of 5 people and the loud music and the barbecue and it's going on at 3 in the morning, well, at that point, what was reasonable maybe at 12 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon is no longer reasonable on a Monday morning at 3 a.m. And so those are the kinds of things that the officers, when they go out, they try to help determine what the reasonableness, but there is no time frame on for calling this.
Right, I use the guidelines of if I'm in my house, my TV's on, my air conditioner's running, and I can hear you 5 houses down, we have a problem. Usually people in this neighborhood are pretty quiet. We get the 1 or 2 houses that show up and we work on it until they leave or something happens. This particular house has already been cited. They don't care. They've already been ticketed. People have been called out numerous times. Other neighbors have complained. It was a train wreck with the Waymos driving in circles because they didn't know what to do with all the vehicles trying to get in and out of the little cul-de-sac. It was interesting to watch. The other comment people have made is if you call in for a loud party problem and you don't leave your information to be contacted back, that they will not come out.
That's not accurate. They'll still come out, but it does help to have somebody that's complaining. And so it's hard to, I guess, if they come out and they say, well, it sounds and looks fairly reasonable, but they can't go to somebody and try to figure out what the actual, you're hearing it in your bedroom or whatever, and do they need to turn the bass down? Do they need to, what exactly needs to occur? And so those are the kinds of things that a complainant always helps, but it's not required.
Got it. Well, I always wonder what these people are thinking anyways when they're doing what they're doing, but great, thank you. That answered some of the questions I've been having people ask me about.
Yeah, sometimes these loud parties, they're actually money-making endeavors. And so if they look at it and they'll say, well, if I have to pay $250 or whatever the previous fine amount was, but I'm bringing in $1,200 or $1,500 for the night, that's just the cost of doing business, and I'm willing to do that. And so those are the kinds of things that this ordinance now will give us some extra teeth to help to try to manage those kind of habitual problems where not only do they fall under the nuisance party ordinance, but if they continue to do it, then they become a high impact property. And then now there's other tools that we have to work with them and get them in compliance.
So if they take their citations and want to go to court with it, who needs to show up in defense of that?
Typically the officer, but if we have complainants that are victims, we always love to have people come in as witnesses and victims. And so that's where that helps to try to, I guess, curb some of those activities where that we have actual victims that come in. And it's not just the officer and the body-worn cameras that we have. We actually have people in the community that are impacted that come in, and that goes a long way in court.
Sign me up. So, okay, great. Thank you.
Lisa, thank you so much for those questions. That was really, really helpful. Thank you. So I don't think we have any more questions in the chat.
Yeah, I'm
Yes,
sorry. I need to clarify, do we have to agree to be contacted by the officer then?
No, you don't have to agree. It's just as helpful.
Okay, I came in late and I have a brain injury. Do we call the non-emergency line? Or is there one person we should be contacting?
For what type of call for service would that be, ma'am?
The parties that are loud parties that are going. I've got 2 homes in my neighborhood, and they're actually on different streets, one street over, that are extremely loud, and they go, you can hear them inside my house, and sometimes it shakes the walls of my house.
Yeah, those would be any of the nuisance parties would be a non-emergency call. So if you call the 350-480-350-8311, those calls will be received and they will prioritize them for our officers to go out on.
And you're saying it's better if I say yes?
It helps. It helps for the actual prosecution. It also helps if the officer then can go out to the house and can stand at your doorstep and actually hear the music. And those are all things that go in the reports that they can go and testify to, and they put in the citations. So it's just very helpful for the officers if there's
Okay,
someone that wants to contact.
okay,
Thank you,
thank
Catherine.
you. Sure.
Any other hands raised or chat questions?
None that I see.
All right, seeing none, then we will go ahead and adjourn this meeting. Again, we have another meeting in person tonight at 6 o'clock. And I just want to say, Commander Hale, Eric Anderson, Shauna, thank you so much to our staff, and thank you so much to our residents for joining us. This is a really important topic. And again, the thing that we're looking to do is to make our neighborhood safer and have a better quality of life for the residents in our community. So thank you for joining us, and we'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.